About a month ago, I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I said, wow, I hate myself. And then I opened up my VTuber model and I said, wow, I hate this too. So I decided to completely redraw, re-rig, and redo my VTuber model entirely from scratch in 1 month. Because Live 2D Cubism runs on a subscription model and I didn't want to have to pay for more than 1 month. First, before I even think about renewing my Live 2D subscription, I need a new design. My old designs were nice and I like them, but nothing about them really screams Crystal, do they? For a VTuber, branding is pretty important even if you don't go too hard on role-playing your lore. There are a lot of VTubers out there, so at the very least, your design needs to be eye-catching and unique so that you don't blend in with the masses. For me, this was, difficult. As a crystal, there's really only so many things that I can add, and, it turns out that I'm not all that good at drawing gemstones or crystal textures. I had to practice that first. I'm also not very good at outfit design, so I asked a friend very nicely to help me come up with a cool, edgy design. Please, 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 please.
Yeah, sure, fine.
Great. Perfect. And the result was this. I loved the outfit, but as I was drawing it on my clothingless model base, there was still something missing. So I decided to break my own face and arms and torso and leg. I took inspiration from the Japanese art of kintsugi to decorate myself with various cracks and, more importantly, to create a brand new hole. But that'll come into play a little bit later. Satisfied with the design and my new ideas, I got to work drawing the rest of the model. Since I made my last model a year ago, I've been drawing a lot. The rendering for my last model was a bit simplistic, and it ended up not showing the shading very much in the final stages of the model. So this time, I really tried to push the values in the shades a little bit more. I was really nervous to be bold with colors when I made my last model too, so everything this time is a lot more saturated and vibrant. For the eyes in particular, I added a lot of layers and darker colors so that when you zoom out, the effect is a lot more obvious. The lack of real contrast on my old eyes made them lose a lot of definition while zoomed out, which is, like, how people are going to be seeing the model for most of the time. For the hair, I knew that I wanted it to be a lot more detailed, even down near the bottom. I got kinda lazy with the curls on my last model, and the front pieces look like a wig that someone killed with a hair straightener. So my goal was to make the hair look fluffier and messier all around. I really like the look of wavy, messy hair, and I just think it's fun to color. I also wanted to try and make the inside of the hair add more to the galaxy theme, and then I could animate it later with the parallax effect to make it seem like a window into space. That kind of effect works really well in Live 2D, so I didn't even shade those parts of the hair. I just added a gradient and brushed the star effect over it. The only bad part about this is how many layers it takes up, but that's manageable. I studied a lot of different references to really nail the textures of the outfit this time too, using new brushes, effects, and overlays. I found this crystal background texture and I overlaid it over the top and the hair ribbon, and I ended up really liking it. This little stippling texture brush also really comes in handy for adding light bounce and scattered reflections, so I used it a little bit on the parts of the clothing that I wanted to look really shiny, and other parts. I also didn't merge as many of the layers this time, keeping some of the shadows and lighting layers separated to be able to move them later in Live 2D. It makes everything a little bit unwieldy, but it's an easy way to give a model a lot more depth. And all you really need to do is make sure that everything is neatly arranged in folders. You are naming and putting your layers into organized folders, right? This is especially important for the various crystals because being able to manipulate the shadows, lights, and various facets are how we're going to make them look shiny and three-dimensional when we animate them. I wanted to add this same shiny effect to the thigh highs and the jacket collars, so all of these layers needed to be separated. Another thing that a lot of VTuber models have that I've never really been able to add are different arm toggles. I decided to try and draw a lot of different arm toggles at first, but eventually I narrowed it down to 3. Crossed arms, hand on hip, and arm up. The arm up will be important for when I eventually hook up my TTS bot, but that's a topic for another video.
Ooh, let's shake it up a little.
Yellow.
Barry,
let's shake it up
breakfast
a little.
Is ready.
Barry,
coming.
Breakfast is
Hang
ready.
on a second.
To add arm toggles like this, you have to make sure that the upper arm and the lower arm parts are both separated pieces. That way, you can keep the upper arm and only have to draw the art for the arm toggle so that it covers the severed end. That way, no one knows that you're actually armless. I also last minute decided to add a sweater toggle because I felt a little bit exposed. It's winter, okay? I'm cold. And with that, we have our completed artwork. Now I have to re-up my Live 2D subscription. So let's get to work. The clock's ticking. Live 2D cubism is how most, if not all, Live 2D models are animated, and there's a pretty complicated process involved to make static art go from this to this. The process actually starts before you even open up Live 2D cubism. You see, to convince the eye that a 2D picture is moving in a 3D manner, you have to draw parts of your character that aren't usually seen. So anything that might be hidden, like the back of jackets, the underside of skirts, the armpit flesh, and the entirety of the hair, because if your model moves around, you don't want to be missing these pieces. It'll look off and flat and like you're missing pieces, which really ruins the illusion, because that's all Live 2D is. It's just one big illusion. You have to cut your art as well, separating everything out into many layers, depending on how detailed you want your model to be. The more layers you have, the more detailed your model. For example, I have this little crystal here separated from the top bodice. This is so that I can control the movement of it and keep it separated from the physics so it doesn't distort when I add the, you know. Speaking of, I also have the bodice top piece separated from the lower part, because I needed these parts to move independently and still show the bottom of the bodice underneath. But this is just the basics of how you should think about separating art for Live 2D. I'm no expert, and while rigging this model, I had to go in a few times and adjust the pieces or add more back pieces while I was working. But that's not too difficult to do, kind of, once you understand how it works anyway. I'll get to that part a bit later. The next step in Live 2D rigging is meshing the artwork. This is an exercise in absolute tedium that I think probably took me 2 days of work just on its own. An entire weekend wasted placing tiny dots on the screen in the rough shape of my art. Live 2D animates with meshes, so getting these correct is pretty important, or it can lead to weird distortions later. You want to follow the basic structure of the art that you're meshing, so for something like hair, that means essentially tracing over the strands. It's generally a good method to follow the shadows of whatever you're trying to mesh and just try to think of how it might look if it was a 3D shape and you were looking at it in Blender or another 3D program. For example, the crystals I meshed like this, just following the facets. This is so I can manipulate the angle of the crystal without having to use layers. I can just drag the center point of the mesh to the side and it gives an amazing illusion of depth. Sometimes, for Live 2D meshes, less is more, especially if you're rigging something geometric, like a gemstone or a crystal or something. What else is made of geometric shapes? Like a gemstone or a metal or some kind of armor or something. For a wide flat surface like the head that needs to have a lot of very precise deformations, it's better to focus on the outline so that it doesn't distort and look terrible when you have to shove it into weird shapes. You can use this tool in Live 2D to draw a line and have it create basically a perfectly spaced out mesh line that is really useful for outlining your pieces, and especially for any layers that are just line art, like the face outline here. Now, you'll notice that there is a McDonald's-themed glow around some of these dots. That means that I've glued the outline of the head to the base color of the head. What does this mean?
They ask you how you are, you just
Don't worry about it, kitten. All you need to know is that glue links together two meshes. You can apply different weights if you're smart, but I'm not smart enough to fully understand how glue works and will only make a fool of myself trying to explain it here, so if you're interested, there are a lot of other really good tutorials out there. Because, who am I kidding? This definitely isn't a real tutorial. Overall, the better your meshes are, the easier it will be for you in the future. So even though it's really tempting to just hit that auto mesh button, don't. This is one of the rare times where it's actually worth it to just be meticulous and precise instead of just slopping something out for the sake of saving time. After meshing everything, you have to set up the texture atlas. This is basically the giant PNG where your model's parts are saved so that the program knows what to move around. It is very important that you lay out all of your pieces efficiently and that nothing overlaps. If any of your meshes overlap even a single pixel, it'll look really weird by adding stray pixels and weird color overlapping. So just be careful when you set it up. And if you notice something looks off about your art, 9 times out of 10, it's probably an issue with your texture atlas. For this model, I had to use more than one texture atlas, so I made one really large size texture and the rest a little bit smaller. For parts like the star textures, I shrunk because I didn't need them in super high definition, but you should keep most of your parts at 100% scale or they might look blurry zoomed in. This is yet another time where it's really tempting to just use their auto placement function, but it's more efficient and you'll waste a lot less space if you just do it yourself. Trust me, your computer will thank you later. Then we move on to Deformer hierarchy. This is where I admit that I'm still not entirely sure how this works. I just know that you want to put the larger basic motions on the topmost deformers and gradually get more detailed with it as you nest more deformers within. You want to create a lot of nested deformers for physics specifically, because if you overlap physics on the same deformer, you might get stiff and choppy movements that definitely don't look smooth and flowy and bouncy, which is everything that a VTuber model aspires to be. Let's look at the hair physics, for example. For this strand alone, I have 7 different deformers, all for the same art mesh. This is because I had to layer the movement animations so they all flow together and don't try to overlap movements. The more deformers you have, the smoother the resulting physics tend to look. You also have to consider what the physics will look like when everything is moving together. For hair in particular, typically you move down the length of the art mesh and only animate a small section of the hair per deformer. So you can get really detailed hair physics by making smaller movements in smaller sections, or you can get really basic movements with bigger movements in larger sections. Just like regular animation, live 2D animation is better and more smoother the more quote-unquote frames you add. And the frames in question here are the parameters linked to physics. And just like deformers, you have to set those up too. Luckily, parameters can be added in any order, and it doesn't really matter all that much, but for your own sanity, you're gonna want to keep those as organized as possible. So get ready to make some more folders. Now, here's where I disclose again that I've used a lot of paid-for live 2D tutorials to pick up on deformer hierarchy and how to use parameters, so I'm not going to disclose everything in this video, sorry. But as you can see here, while the head movement follows a pretty basic angle XYZ, though I'll get more into that a little bit later, for body movement I've looped together a lot of different parameters that kind of feed into each other. That's because for this model, I really wanted the movement to be slightly delayed, so that when I shift my head to the side, my hips don't immediately also swing to the side. It gives it a bit more of a realistic feel to the movement and makes it look way more dynamic. And I think I managed to get the effect a little bit. It's kind of delayed, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back to how we set up the head movement since that's a little bit more straightforward. So, parameters control the movements of your model. This is anywhere from basic movements like eye blinking and head turning to complicated physics animations that look really weird and extreme on their own, but once chained through a hierarchy of physics layers, ends up looking not quite so dramatic. For head movements, this time I wanted to be a little bit more detailed with them. I've always been kind of too nervous to deform the head to the side, leaving every model I've made so far looking like they're just kind of tilting their heads a little bit rather than turning in a 3D space. Figuring out how to distort art so that the head looks like it's turning without making it look like some kind of disfigured anomaly is really hard and takes time, practice, and a lot of very, very minute movements and adjustments that no one will ever really notice but you. You also have to keep in mind the deformer hierarchy and be careful not to distort the facial features too much. The face is what people are staring at most of the time, so you really want to put a lot of effort into the details. This means you should probably only make basic movements on the top level deformers and keep most of your actual perspective warping on the specific face featured deformers. Now, with the more 3D movement for the head, I can't get away with being lazy about the hair ribbon perspective either. But for some reason, it is really hard for me to mentally picture how I should deform the bow to match the head angle. I have a bit of an issue with depth perception. But I learned a new technique that was really helpful. Apply 3D rotation expression. This is another screen that is very confusing, and honestly, you just kind of have to play around with it. The important things to know are rotation of angle, because that will make the deformation stronger or weaker. You generally want to keep these values between 10 and 30. The output isn't going to be instantly perfect, and it's definitely not going to be in the right spot, but it's a really good start if you're confused how to rig the perspective of an object. You can still adjust the deformer after you use this tool as a starter, so it's worth trying out. Now, I should explain how I set up the eyes for this model, because I did it a bit differently than my last one. The eyelashes are actually on their own layer and separate from the iris, so I can't select the entire eye in one deformer. This is because I wanted to link the eyelash movement to the eyebrows and the mouth for a lot more expressive movement. And because I wanted to deform the entire eyelash section separately from the iris. This is probably the biggest and the most important change that I made to this model compared to my old ones. Even if it's subtle, having the eye and face change shape depending on if the mouth is opened or if the eyebrows are raised adds way more than you think. Just look at this comparison between my own models. The old one looks way more stiff, right? Please go say right. Yes, please. It looks so much better in the comments down below. Please, I spent so much time on this. So in order to deform the eyes for angle XYZ, I use the eyelash top deformer and just select the side of the eye that I want to deform. I think this is kind of suboptimal, but it works for what I need it to do, and it ended up looking pretty good while also letting me move each separate piece of the eye for more detailed movement and perspective. The iris and the pupil are also completely separated art meshes, and both have movement set to eyeball X and Y, so there's a bit of a parallax effect there too, which just means that it looks more 3D when the pupils of the eye don't move as much as the head angles and instead look like they're staying in place. Speaking of, for all those star effects that I mentioned earlier, I want to make it look like there's a void within my hair. Mostly, I want this to be on the inside of the hair, so I took all the hair layers, clipped them to the underside of the hair mesh, and moved the stars to the top hierarchy deformer so they would barely move. Because the stars are static and clipped to a small section of the hair, it looks like they're very far away, giving the illusion of depth. It's kind of a trippy effect, but I really like it. Now, to finish the head movements, I decided to once again use physics-based movement. This not only makes the model more expressive by adding a little bit of a bounce to your movements, but by setting up physics-based movements, you can then use those physics to chain the delayed body movements that I wanted to use and incorporate it into this model. As you can probably see from the amount of parameters that I have for the body movement, this model's physics are extremely complicated and hard to explain. It's a chain of physics within physics within physics, and I honestly forgot what I did like an hour after I finished it, so please don't expect me to explain this in a coherent way. I did learn a few things though. Namely, that it looks better if you chain physics together for the body rather than trying to make it look like the model is completely turning to the side using the body angle parameters. I accomplished this also using a couple of control parameters, which are like blank parameters that you use to help link the physics together smoothly. Only the head turn really matters when it comes to angle physics, and in my opinion, it looks a little bit weird if the whole body turns too. Usually, when you're just kind of standing there and you want to turn to the side, you only really move your shoulders and your torso. You don't move your legs too. So, other than the booba and the shoulders, the perspective of the body only really needs to be slightly adjusted based on angle. Instead, you want to move the hips so that they kind of sway side to side. In my opinion, this looks better than just having the model turn and adds the, you know, the VTuber hip sway. It's very important, trust me.
Wow.
I added a whole bunch of parameters that I thought would look nice and add to subtle movement, so the body doesn't ever look static. This also includes things like thigh and tummy physics because, well, you know why. You know what else is really important? Mouth tracking. I thought my previous model's mouth tracking was really good, but I was an idiot. Here's past me trying to explain what blend shapes are. From how I've heard it described, blend shapes basically get rid of the need to synthesize corners or to make every single mouth keyform, since they'll stack on top of each other and sort of merge together to adjust the mouth shapes for you. But you know what that idiot forgot? That's right. She didn't know how to properly use blend shape weights. Blend shape weights are really important, especially for V-bridge or mouth rigging, but they can get very confusing very quickly. I'll try to explain it, but even I forget and get lost while navigating these graphs, so bear with me here. You have to first select the art mesh or the deformer that you have the blend shape key to. So for this example, we're using the upper mouth line. You can then select any of the blend shapes that you've rigged already. So for this, we'll select mouth open. Now, I already have this weight set with mouth funnel, where you can see here that when mouth open is at 0, mouth funnel is weighted to 100. But if mouth open is at 1, which means that the mouth is fully open, then mouth funnel is at 0, so mouth funnel shouldn't activate. This essentially means that when the mouth is open, it won't try to make the mouth funnel shape as well, which would ruin the perfect O shape of an open VTuber mouth. But with the graph here, it allows the mouth funnel shape to blend with the mouth open at certain parameters. Now let's compare mouth open with both models. As you can see, one mouth looks, better, a little less jank. Like there's less of the upper lip moving up. That's because of blend shape weights. In my previous model, I didn't apply the necessary blend shape weights to keep the upper mouth from activating, so it sometimes overlapped with blend shapes that it shouldn't have, which made it look like the lip was curling up or my mouth was too open and my mouth got too big, and it just didn't track very well and it didn't look very natural. I also didn't add any blend shape weighting to the fang of my previous models, so it looked weird and off with certain shapes because it wasn't perfectly synced with the upper mouth line. Oops. I said I'd talk about how to add extra art layers if you screw up your model by cutting it wrong or if you just want to add something, so let's go over that really quick while I add my sweater to cover up my, poggers. You might think that you can just import a PSD and then move it to where it's supposed to be in your model, and you can do that, but if you want it to be matched exactly to your existing character, exactly where you drew it, this is what I do. I have a second file that is the exact same size as my model PSD, only completely blank. So I copy-paste the art that I want to add in there, and then I add the whole file as a new art mesh. Not that hard. You can also do a very similar thing to update the art or to change anything. I had an error in the original art that I drew for the upper arms, so I had to replace those files. But I'd already started rigging, and more importantly, I'd gone through the painstaking process of figuring out glue to glue the two arm parts together, so I really just didn't want to swap out the art mesh with a new one. What I did instead was still use the blank model canvas, but when I copied the art over, I named the layer the exact same thing that it is in my Live2D Cubism file. Make sure you aren't stupid, like me, and forget to remove the copy that Clip Studio Paint automatically adds because it'll fuck everything up. Now, when you import the PSD, you select Replace instead of Add as New, and it'll go through and skip all the layers that aren't in the new file, and it should only replace the ones that has the exact same name as the layer you're trying to replace. I do this because I'm paranoid, and replacing the entire file can mess up the other art meshes if you've done anything to them in Live2D, so this is safer. Oh, and don't forget to update your texture atlas with the new additions as well. Live2D will remind you to do this when you try to export the model anyway, but you probably don't want to get caught off guard by that. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, let's talk toggles. The toggle for the sweater was pretty easy, but with it active in Live2D, I had to go through all of the body physics to make sure that everything lined up. I added its physics as well, mostly using blend shapes and being kind of lazy because it's just like a modesty toggle, and who really needs that anyway, right? The arm toggles were also fairly easy to set up. I just added a toggle parameter and I set the top deformer's opacity to match. I used to put the opacity toggles on the art meshes, but that led to some weird interactions sometimes, so this is just easier. Then I just matched up the lower arm to the upper arm's physics and I was done. The only arm toggle that was somewhat difficult was changing some of the physics for the hand on hip toggle, because the dip between the shoulder here got a little bit weird and I just kind of messed around for a bit with glue and it worked out somehow. It's fine, the hair covers it anyway. Speaking of hair, I wanted to add a couple different hairstyles to my model and I thought it would be pretty easy. I was wrong. Well, the short hair was easy enough. I just hid the long hair layers and made it into an easy toggle. But the ponytail? At first, I took longer pieces of normal hair and liquefied them in my art program into more of a ponytail shape. My art program hated this and threatened to crash on me so many times that I should have taken it as a warning, but I just kept going, for some reason. It ended up not mattering at all because I decided I really didn't want to go through the process of rigging hair all over again, so I only kept the top part. Instead of using the art that I made that spent me 3 hours because my art program kept crashing, I copy-pasted a couple of the deformers for the back hair and made a new deformer on top. This deformer let me adjust the general shape, size, and location of the ponytail strands so that I could make it look like a ponytail. And because I just copied over the deformers, it moves, well, enough. The only real issue with rigging the ponytail this way is that I would have to go through and change the parameters to new parameters and then copy over the physics to the new parameters if I wanted to change the strength of the physics, since it's linked to the normal long hair, and I'm just way too lazy to do that. So the ponytail hair physics are a little intense, but it's fine, it's good enough, it's just a toggle. Surely chat won't like it that much, right? Now it's time for every Live2D rigger's favorite batch of toggles, expressions. I added a bunch of different little images that are basically just emojis to enhance the various expressions. I think my favorite part of the new expressions is that they have a little physics wiggle whenever you swap them in and when I move around. It makes it feel a lot more dynamic when I do this. And now for my favorite toggle that I've ever come up with. I smashed a giant hole in my face. A VTuber's face is pretty important and needs to be really memorable. And what's more memorable than a giant hole in the face? I rigged the star in the middle to move along with my other eye, and it even blinks. When I move my head or look around, the parallax effect of the stars in the background makes it look like there's a giant empty void inside my head. Because I'm a VTuber. And I can do this. So with that, everything is done. Is what I would say if I didn't also decide to make a completely new outfit complete with even more crystals, but that one we're gonna save for my debut. The one that I'm gonna have. Probably. Maybe. And it's not because I forgot to cancel my Live2D subscription, so I ended up getting charged for another month anyway. This version of my VTuber model really is so much better than my old one by a huge mile. The head turning alone already feels so much more realistically 3D, but even the hair physics are just something that I can stare at for hours. Look at how stiff the old one is. It's like I finally learned how to wash my awful matted hair. It's so smooth now. The hair ribbon too is leagues better than my terrible old one. It bounces and moves like it has actual presence rather than a flat, limp cardboard piece stapled to the back of my head. The old one barely even has any ankle movement. And I have ears this time. What a development. The head angles in general are just a lot smoother and look way more natural. The arm toggles are also just a really nice addition for just chatting streams to make it feel like I'm standing comfortably and talking normally rather than in kind of like a stiff A pose the whole time. The mouth tracking we already went over, but the face overall is just way more expressionate in general. The added mouth physics and the eyelash eyebrow link make my expressions come across way more, even without using any toggles. This body also moves way more, which compared to the old one isn't saying a whole lot. I didn't even have any hip sway, how tragic. This model is way bouncier as a whole, and it can track my body movement separately from my head angles, so I can get a ton of variety in how I move just by changing how I move in real life. Even when I am completely locked in and focused and playing a game, there's so much life just in the facial expression alone. I first tried Ramon's party room, and you make me bald? You make me bald? I'm gonna have a full-on Megamind crash out. For once, I feel like I can look at something I made and be objectively proud of it. And for you guys, since my motivation to make content is linked entirely to how much I enjoy looking at my own VTuber model, well, you're in luck! If you got this far, thank you so much for watching, and genuinely thank you for all your support. I'll see you next time! Bye! What the fuck did you have? What do you have? What do you have?